This is the video that will explain the retake process for Chapter P, Part B test. And right off the bat, you see here, watch this video and take notes of everything. But if you're still not being successful, at this point, you have to ask yourself, what is it you're not doing that you should be doing? And the answers to that are things that only you are going to know, because I give you the worked out solutions to the homework, and it is quite possible that some of you have just been writing those down and you haven't been doing the homework yourself. You can't be successful in pre-calculus if you do that. You just can't. You have to have the practice and get it into your mind. Secondly, some of you are not listening to the videos still. So this is, again, one of those times when I'm going to put some code words in here as we go through this video. And you just have to make sure that you are listening to everything that's said, because I'll write things down, but it's pretty obvious that some of you are not hearing what's behind that. And that's because you're missing those key points that people in the class are getting, and everything is good. So please do what you know you have to do. Yes, this class requires a lot of time. You know, you're watching a video every day and you're doing a homework assignment. And that's something that you know coming into the course. If this has got you in over your head, now is the time to drop, because we can still drop you from the Pine Tech class lists without really having any penalty. As we go further on, that's not going to happen. Pine Tech will definitely be putting W's in for withdrawals, and you'll have a transcript that has a W on it before you start college. So it's really time to sit down and investigate, is this something that's going to work for you or not? If you can dedicate the 2 hours each day to it, then you'll be fine. And it's not always going to take 2 hours, because some of you work through the homework a lot quicker, but it is time consuming. You're getting those 5 college credits for this course, so that's how it pays for itself. All right, so to start with, watch the video, take notes of everything, pretty normal. As you watch the video, they're going to be code words. You have to write those down. If you don't have them, you don't retake. Don't share them with others. You lose your retake. And again, I'll find out about it. Somebody will say something. Go back in the notes and highlight the problems that are similar to the test problems. You're going to find that these things come either directly out of your notes and always very similar to what you have on the review. So that's why we do number 4. You have to redo the review assignment. And this is another one where I get the feeling that perhaps some of the people from the first retakes, you didn't do the review assignment. You sent me the same pictures you gave me the first time, and your results spoke to that. So you know what you have to do. Be honest with yourself, be honest with me, do what you're supposed to do, because it's going to lead you being successful. Number 5, contact me before October 19th with number 1 through 4 above all done, and I'll check to see that they're done. I have a checkoff sheet that we'll go through there. And then the deadline for the retake is October 20th, and there is no going past that date. This is a hard deadline. This is an opportunity, and if it's something that you want, then plan for it. You know, you have to retake that by October 20th at 2:45 p.m. is the cutoff. So if I were you, I would make sure that I can start that test around 1 o'clock at the latest, and have enough time to do that, because by the end of the school day, I'm not going to sit and watch what's going on here. I have so much to do right now with my 10 and 11-hour days every day that I'm here in school, and about another additional hour at home prepping. So make sure that you can meet those deadlines. Now, working through what the distance learners work through for their test, the very first thing you see up here is please show all your work. I've talked about that again and again. Points come from the work. And when you are putting this into Schoology, I don't want to see your answers as you're trying the best you can to type those into the Schoology page for your test. I want to see those on your notebook paper. So it's exact answers only, no rounding unless it's specified. Don't enter any values into the test itself. And I still had 2 people that were still doing that. You have to read directions on these tests and follow them because you will miss points for not following directions. Alrighty, number 1 says find the value of x or y so that the line through the pair of points has the given slope. And it's through -1, 4, and 4y, but the slope is 0. So we think for a second, slope is 0. That means this is a horizontal line. And horizontal lines always have the equation y equals something. So then you think, well, what does y equal? Well, 4. That's what it equals, because one of those ordered pairs has a y coordinate of 4. Y equals 4. On to the next problem. And if I hadn't had to talk through that, it would have been done in about half a second. So think about what it's telling you. Another thing you have to do with these tests is you have to quickly work through the problems that you can work with. If you've done the practice for the homework and you know them quickly, you'll be able to finish these tests without any trouble. If that's not the case, if you have not been doing the homework, you don't have enough practice to get the speed up. Find the different forms of the equation for the line through the given pair of points. Do not use any spaces between characters when you type your answers. Again, I didn't want you typing anything in. So, first things first, we have 2 points. We have to find the slope. And it's slope, find the slope, average rate of change. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So 1 minus 3 over 8 minus a -3, which will be -2. and 11. So there's our slope of -2/11. Then it's up to you which of those 2 points you want to use. I think I'll just use -3, 3. So it would be y minus 3 equals -2/11 times x plus 3, because our point slope form is right there in the red. So this would be my answer for point slope form. And I write too big, so I'm not going to be able to fit that in the slot. And then we would go ahead and actually do the math to get this into slope-intercept form, which is y equals mx plus b. Just checking on the sound here. Something's going weird, so hopefully that's all fixed now. We would go ahead and distribute the -2/11. And this is like a 3/1, so you multiply top times top, bottom times bottom. And then we would add 3, and 3 is the same thing as 33/11. So -2/11 x plus 27/11. So that's our slope-intercept form. And lastly, we have general form. And general form is ax plus by plus c equals 0. Let me write that down. And then, this is the reason I knew some of you either weren't listening or you had forgotten this piece. You cannot have fractions or decimals when you're talking about general form. So what we would have to do is multiply everything in this equation that we just had with the slope-intercept by 11. That's our LCD. Would look like so, and then we'd move everything over to one side. And I'm going to go ahead and add 2x and subtract 27 from both sides. So this will say 2x plus 11y minus 27 equals 0. So that's general form. No fractions, no decimals, all nice and clean and set equal to 0 over there. Now, definitely time for a code word, and that code word is listen, L-I-S-T-E-N, L-I-S-T-E-N, listen. That is so very important in this course. Next up, we've got find the value of x and y, for which we have the point x and 2, and then 8 and y as ordered pairs. So what we're really doing here is we're saying put a 2 in for y and see what you get. So -4x minus 3 times 2 equals 9. -4x minus 6 equals 9. We'll add 6 to both sides. -4x equals 15. Divide by -4, and x equals -15/4. And then for the second point, we're supposed to put an 8 in for x and go through the same process. It's just substitution, that's all it is. So -32 minus 3y equals 9. add 32 to both sides. Negative 3y equals 41. Divide by negative 3. And there's our x and y pieces that we needed for that one. And yes, we want to see all the work. I mean, that's where the points come from. You have to show all of those steps. Next one up, determine the equation of the line described. Put the answer in the slope-intercept form. So when you're done, remember we want y equals mx plus b. Write an equation to a line that goes through the point 4, negative 8 and is perpendicular to 5x plus 9y equals 92. So here's where we start. We have to know the slope of this line because the perpendicular slope is the opposite in the reciprocal. So that means we're going to subtract 5x from both sides. And we're going to divide by 9. And yeah, 92/9 gives people a fright until they realize, oh, I don't have to use that for anything. So all I have to do is realize my slope right now is negative 5/9, which means my slope of the perpendicular needs to be the opposite in the reciprocal, which is 9/5. And then I have to use that in point slope form with the ordered pair 4, negative 8. So that will be y plus 8 equals 9/5 times the quantity x minus 4. And then we'll go ahead and distribute the 9/5. And again, think of that as a 4 over 1, so that you'll do 9 times 4, negative 36/5. And then we will subtract 8 from both sides, which would be negative 40/5. And y equals 9/5 x minus 76/5. And that is in slope-intercept form. So that is good to go. Again, remember that your graphing calculator can take care of fractions for you. So if you're really getting weirded out by the fractions that we have here, you can use your calculator to do the math. You'll get a decimal answer, then hit math fraction number 1, and it will even convert it back to a fraction for you. So don't let those little things hang you up in a problem. Solve the problem. Assume that the sales of a certain appliance dealer are approximated by a linear function. Suppose the sales were $9,000 in 1982 and $75,000 in 1987. Let x equals 0 represent 1982. Find the equation giving yearly sales S of x. So first things first, let x equals 0 represent 1982 tells us that time is supposed to be our x variable here. So if 0 is 1982, then this information is represented by 0, 9,000. And then 1987 would be 5 years later, and that was 75,000. So there are our 2 points. And once we have our 2 points, if we're supposed to write an equation for the line, we have to find the slope. So the slope would be our 75,000 minus 9,000. And that will be divided by 5 minus 0. And what happened to some of you was you wrote down your numbers too fast and you had too many zeros or too few zeros when you were going through this. So this would be 66,000 divided by 5, which comes out to 13,200. So that's our slope. And then we get to pick which of these points we want to use. And I would pick this one because that's the y-intercept. So that means I can write this equation with y equals mx plus b super easy and fast because I have the slope and the intercept. So y equals 13,200x plus 9,000. Last but not least, I remembered way up there somewhere it said, oh, you know what you have to do? You have to use S of X for this. There it is. So, not a lot of points, but if you're retaking, you want every point back that you can get. So you want to read those questions carefully and pick up on those little pieces. And there it is. Solve the equation by factoring. So we have to see your factoring in this one. And what we have to do is figure out the numbers that would work for first times first and last times last, and then C, outside times outside plus inside times inside to give us the negative 23. So 1 and 6, 6 and 1, 2 and 3, 3 and 2 for the front. And then in the back, negative 1 and positive 4, positive 1 and negative 4, negative 2 and positive 2. And since we already have the other one switched around, we should be okay there. If you really want to write 2 and negative 2, you can do that. But what you're doing is you're looking for outside times outside plus inside times inside that would give you that negative 23. And you start thinking about 24 and 1 when you see this information, negative 24 and 1. So here, 6 times negative 4 is going to be negative 24. Inside times inside, 1 times 1, and yeah, that's negative 23. So you put the numbers that we did for first times first give us 6 in the first positions in that order, and then you put the numbers for last times last in there in that order. So again, you can check at this particular point and say, hey, is this going to work by doing FOIL? Then 6x plus 1 has to equal 0. You'd subtract 1 from both sides, and you would divide by 6. And then x minus 4 has to equal 0. Most of you just immediately go to x equals 4 on that one, and that's fine. I just have to see, did you factor that? And were you able to get those answer values out of it? But the steps, you have to show the factoring. That's what this problem was all about. Solve the equation by extracting the square roots. Well, I can't do that until my variable that's been raised to a power is isolated all by itself. So first things first, have to divide by 3. So we see that 1/12, and we're hoping like crazy that we can go ahead and reduce that somehow. But 112/3, 3 goes into 11 3 times. I just started doing the math in my head and writing it down. And then we would have a leftover there of 22, and so 3 doesn't divide into that nicely. So now I have my variable and it's squared. I'm going to take the square root of both sides, which means I have to have the plus or minus. So remember, every time that you physically make that square root symbol, you have to go ahead and make the little plus or minus piece out of that. Now, square root of 112/3. While we couldn't reduce that, what we can do is we can figure out, all right, 112. Is there a perfect square that goes into that? Will that help me out at this point? Square root of 3, there's nothing I can do anything about. But that 112, 16 actually goes in there 7 times. So that would give us our 112. Now, while I'm at it, I might as well think about the fact that I have to rationalize the denominator here. And again, that's another thing that if you were just using the book all the way through, you would think we don't have to rationalize the denominator. We absolutely do at the pre-calculus level. When they talk about not rationalizing the denominator, they're talking about anything that we could solve with our graphing calculator, but we're not solving these with our graphing calculator. We're solving these with our noggins, our heads. So now, back up here to say it'll be 4 square roots of 21, so plus or minus 4 square roots of 21 over 3, and then subtracting 2 from both sides. So we definitely are trying to make elegant and perfect answers. We're not following the book about everything, and we definitely will be rationalizing those denominators. So make sure that those are things that you're doing as you work forward. Now that we know how that works, this one says solve the equation algebraically. So I started thinking, I've got y squareds, I don't have any y's, and then I have constants. So I should be able to get y squared on one side, a number on the other side, and just work from there. So add the 3y squared is probably how most people started. And then add the 12. Divide by 6. And then we would have to take the square root, which is, of course, again, as we're writing that down, the positive and negative square root of 15/6. But we should also realize, hey, wait a second, 15/6, I can reduce that. 3 goes into that. So at this point, definitely a good stopping spot to say, okay, let me see here, plus or minus, that would be the square root of 3 goes into 15 5 times. Ooh, 5/2, that's much better. But I'm not done. And I believe on the distance learning test, this was actually multiple choice, so you would have been done at that point. But if this were on paper, as it is in class, we'd say, not good enough, got to rationalize the denominator. So y equals plus or minus the square root of 10 over 2. Next one, and this one's interesting, is solve by completing the square. So this is one of those where you definitely had to hang on to your fraction skills here and work through it. I think there's a worse one later on, though. This one's not horrible as far as fractions go. So the first 2 steps are interchangeable. You could subtract 21 and then divide by 16, or you could divide everything by 16 and then move it over. It makes no difference. All right, didn't know I'd be fighting with the people that are doing the intercom today, but apparently that's how it's going to be. So 16x squared divided by 16, and then we have 40 and 16, which hopefully you look at that and say, wait a second, 8 goes into both of those. So that's going to be 5/2 x, and negative 21/16 is still hanging out over there. So now what we have to do is our little b over 2 squared. And we have 5/2 that we have to divide by 2 and square it, but of course we don't divide fractions. We multiply by the reciprocal. And after you do a couple of these, you realize, well, all I'm going to have to do is multiply my denominator by 2 every time. Yep, that's what you have to do. And then you square it, and we get 25/16. So that's the number that we have to add to both sides of this equation. And over on the right-hand side, that now means that we will have 4/16, which reduces to a very lovely 1/4. And on the left-hand side, we have x plus, and then we say, well, what did we just get done squaring? Oh, 5/4. I know what that one is. So then we'd take the square root of both sides, and we'd make sure that we put our little plus or minus on there. So x plus 5/4 equals plus or minus, the square root of 1 is 1, and the square root of 4 is 2. And then we'd go ahead and subtract 5/4. Now that tells us this is actually something that we can go ahead and find. I mean, too many interruptions today. Let's get in a little choppy. So negative 5 plus 2, negative 3/4. Negative 5 minus 2, negative 7/4. So negative 3/4 and negative 7/4 solved by completing the square. And like I said, that's not the worst of the completing the square problems that we have, but it's a good one. Now this one says solve the equation using the quadratic formula. And you can't do that unless you have a 0 on one side. So I'm going to subtract x squared from both sides, add 13x to both sides, and subtract 36. Now you can do that in multiple steps. If you can't keep track of everything, it's totally fine, not a problem. So we get 0 equals x squared minus 3x minus 4. And then we look at it and say, this has, I have to use the quadratic formula, but boy, that's factorable. Well, we're not supposed to do that. We're supposed to use the quadratic formula. And a equals 1, b equals negative 3, and c equals negative 4. It sure would be a good way to check, though. And x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So negative b would be negative of negative 3, which is 3. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. Negative 3 squared is 9. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 4. All over 2 times 1, which is 2. And you'll notice just doing some of the basics there in your head, and then leaving enough for work to be shown. So negative 4 times 1 times negative 4 is going to be plus 16. So 9 and 16 are 25. And 3 plus or minus 5 divided by 2 again tells us These are two solutions we can find. 3 plus 5 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 3 minus 5 is -2, and -2 divided by 2 is -1. And we have it. And again, could have been found by factoring. And if you had time to go back and check your answers, that would be another good way to check besides using the graphing calculator. Solve the equation graphically by finding the x-intercepts. Your answer should be rounded 2/1000ths. So this one was a, hey, let's go to the calculator right away. And I'm going to pause this and put it in. All right, so this is a cubic, and we know it should look like an S-curve, and the end behavior should be looking like down and up. So we can hit zoom 6, but at least we know what to expect from it. And then second trace, number 2, and Blinky, it says, is way down there at 0, -12. I've got to get Blinky a little closer here. Below it will be to the left, so that's where I hit enter, and then I go up and to the right and hit enter again and enter through guess. So this one said 3 decimal places. That means we're going to round this to 3.587, and that would be our answer. And it is an x-intercept. So there's our ordered pair right there. Alrighty, next one. And it says, choose the one alternative that best completes the statement or answers the question. But again, we have to see the algebra. We have to know that you understand that absolute value has 2 solutions and that you are going to write those according to the number line. Notice that I put my -2 on the left and I put my +2 on the right. And that is a huge concept that some of you have been missing. And that really messed you up when you had absolute value with inequalities. So that absolutely tells me you did not listen to the video. In fact, you might not have even watched the video when I solved the absolute value problems. Because there's no way you would have set it up any other way if you had done that. So we add 11 to both sides, and if you wanted to show that math, that would be great. Because this has so few steps, it just is a sound mathematical practice to show those 2 steps. So 9 and 13. Next up, solve the problem. The length of a rectangle. Oh, when you're talking geometry, you better be drawing pictures. The length of a rectangle is 3 inches more than the width. The area of the rectangle is 154 inches. Find the width of the rectangle. Well, he didn't tell me anything about the width because that's my unknown. So I'm going to make that W. And then it says the length of that is 3 more than the width. That means we have to add 3 to get that. Now, area of a rectangle is length times width. Very basic formula that you had to know from geometry. So if we're going to find area, it's like we're substituting the information that we have in here. So it was 154 equals W times W plus 3. And I started thinking, well, if I have to solve this, I need to have a 0 on one side. So order of operations tells me I better take care of this distribution first, and then I'll move that 154 over to the other side by subtracting. And now, the hope would be that this is something that's factorable, and it is. We didn't say use a graphing calculator, but if you got stuck and you couldn't find the zeros, that would be something you could do to narrow your search. But this is W plus 14 and W minus 11, and that would give us -14 and 11, but of course -14 makes absolutely no sense when we're talking about a word problem. So the width equals 11 inches. And there it is. The next one, little word problem piece here. A rock falls from a tower that is 368 feet high. As it's falling, its height is given by the formula h equals 368 minus 16t squared. How many seconds is it going to take for the rock to hit the ground? And they flat out tell you h is 0. All right, so what to do about that? Well, we could just solve it. I mean, there's no middle term. We don't have to factor or anything like that. We could just go ahead and subtract 368 from both sides. Again, you just have to think logically. If there's no middle term, I don't need to try factoring. And then divide both sides by -16, and we get 23. Take the square root. write your plus or minus down, but then think about your answer. They wanted to know how many seconds it will take for the rock to hit the ground, and we said that the answers needed to be exact. So even though it would sound silly, we would say the square root of 23 seconds, not the negative, absolutely not. And then those of you that actually found that to 3 decimal places, I did give that to you as well, because this is a word problem, and word problems typically, as I mentioned when we've gone through them in the notes, typically you have decimals involved. Because if you're speaking to somebody out there that's not a great mathematician, you probably don't want to say the square root of 23 seconds. Better off saying 4.796, or even around 5 seconds for somebody that doesn't know math. Next one, imaginary numbers. And there were some of you that actually, wrote down no solutions and things like that for the imaginary problems. I'm hoping you just forgot that we covered that in P6. But again, what I see in these tests tells me you're not listening. You're not actually doing the work. You're just copying things down. So let's focus on doing what we need to do to get you to be successful from here on out. And that means giving this your time. So we would use FOIL for this. First times first would be 16. Outside times outside, negative 56i. Inside times inside, minus 18i. Last times last, a positive 63i squared. So 2 things to do here. First would be we have 2 middle terms that can go together for a negative 74i. And then in the back, I squared is negative 1. So that will become minus 63. So then you can take 16 minus 63 and get negative 47 minus 74i. And it's said in standard form, and it is. A plus bi. There it is. It's in the right form. Then, with this one, you should be thinking, hey, that doesn't really fit with what we were just doing there. It does, but it has an extra step, because you have to know that you need to simplify the square root of negative 9 into 3i. And if you do that, then this problem is just like the last problem. So that's a big skill that I've talked a lot about in class. How do I take something that doesn't look right and do one thing to it to make it look like a problem I already know how to do? So first times first would be 12i, outside times outside, negative 6i squared, inside times inside plus 12, and last times last minus 6i. So you see they're kind of out of order this time because we had our 3i in the front, but it's not going to make any difference when we put it in standard form. So we've got 12i minus 6i, so that's going to give us a 6i. And then the I squared is negative 1, so negative 6 times negative 1 is 6, and 6 plus 12 is 18. Again, those are minimal steps that we need to see when we go through these problems. If you added half steps in between that led you to that answer, then you're totally fine. Alrighty, down here. And this one was write the expression in standard form again, so that's something to think about. And we have division. And first thing I'm looking for is there any way for me to reduce this, make it easier, and there isn't. So the problem becomes, do I know about the complex conjugate? Do I know how to do that work? So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and take care of your denominator. So first times first is 9. Outside times outside and inside times inside are going to cancel each other out because this is a sum and difference pattern of 2 binomials. And then we'd have minus 81i squared. But of course, we know I squared is negative 1. So that's going to make it 9 plus 81, which is going to give us 90. All right, so then we go after our numerator. And first times first up there, 8 times 3 is 24. Outside times outside plus 72i, inside times inside plus 6i, last times last plus 18i squared. So we're really going to have I squared of negative 1, and that'll be 24 plus a negative 18, which is 24 minus 18, which is 6. And then we would have plus 78i all over 90. Now, if you didn't notice that 6 comes out of all of these, you could, because they're all even, take a 2 out first, and then you'll probably catch it. But 6 will go into all of this, and 6 goes into 78 13 times. And then you can go ahead and reduce the 6 and the 90. So we would have 1 plus 13i all over 15, and then it said we had to give our answer in standard form. So 1/15 plus 13/15 I would be our answer. All right. Absolutely cannot use your graphing calculator to do those problems. I've never in anything that we have talked about said, hey, let's just grab the calculator when we're doing imaginary numbers. So I have to see how that works. And this one says solve the equation, exact answers only, and we see that we don't have a 0 on one side, so we have to subtract an x and add a 2. And that will give us 3x squared minus 7x plus 5 equals 0. And we left this one up to you. Really would like to see you completing the square more, so we would move that 5 over to the other side. And then we would divide everything by 3 because completing the square only works if your a value is 1. So now we're ready to complete the square. And that means we're going to have to take b, divide it by 2, and square it. So negative 7/6 squared is 49/36. So we're going to add 49/36 to both sides. And like I said, if the fractions creep you out, then don't do this next part by hand. But negative 5/3, if we multiply the top and the bottom by 12 to get the 36 there, is going to be negative 60/36 plus 49/36. We already know what's going on over here because we just had to figure out that we needed to square negative 7/6 to make this work. So we have our little x minus 7/6 squared, and that equals negative 11 over 36. And we have to take the square root of both sides and do the little plus or minus. And then we need to do some simplifying while we're at it. We have the square root of a negative, so we're going to have I. And yes, we did work with these when we went through section P6. If you're saying, oh, this test wasn't supposed to have imaginaries on it. Yeah, we just got done doing other imaginaries, so of course it had imaginaries on it. And then we'd add 7/6 to both sides. I think some of you just got so worked up that this was a test that, you just didn't do what you knew you had to do. Second code word, listen. L-I-S-T-E-N. Second code word, listen. Solve the inequality algebraically, write the solution in interval notation. So we've got to remember to do that when we get at the end. Now this is absolute value with a less than. So things that have a distance from 0 that's less than 15, those things are going to fit between negative 15 and positive 15. And then we go ahead and focus on the middle, subtract 7 all over the place. And then we have to change this into interval notation, which would be from negative 22 to 8. No equals bars, so no square brackets on that one. Negative 22 to 8. We get to solve the inequality algebraically, write the solution again in interval notation. But this one we can't just go ahead and start separating things because the absolute value is not isolated yet. So that would mean first step, and it's a big one, is just remembering, hey, I've got to add the 2 first and get a 3 over there. Now I have absolute value with less than, and absolute value with less than is and. So we have to write an and inequality. And then we go ahead and subtract 5 from all 3 pieces. And then divide everything by negative 3, which of course will flip our inequalities. And last but not least, we know that this is written backwards. So in interval notation, we would have to put the 2/3 first and then the 8/3. Remember, interval notation is only correct if it's written down according to the number line. So the other thing I wanted to mention here was that if you're not using an and, set up a compound inequality for this, you're not going to get all the points. Some of you are using 2 different setups instead of just one and setup. The Pearson Algebra 2 book is the only book in math that does that. And it's not intended to be something that you hang on to forever. It's in one section as a baby step. That's all it is. So we're not going to split these up and make them into 2. We're going to keep them as an and compound inequality because this is pre-calculus and that's the level that we are at. We're not at the baby steps. This one says we are supposed to solve the inequality and write this in interval notation. And since there aren't any directions, we know with a quadratic we are absolutely supposed to try factoring first. And we want to see where those zeros are. So this would be x minus 3 and x minus 5, which means that 3 and 5 are where we're at. And then you could just make a very quick sketch for yourself and say, all right, it had a positive x squared, and this is 3, and this is 5, and where is it greater than or equal to 0? Here and here. So in interval notation, it's going to be from negative infinity up to 3, including the 3, because it did have an equals bar, union with 5 to infinity. So that's going to cover everything now that I've covered over the top of it, the black arrow is showing us. That's where our solutions are because that's where it's greater than or equal to 0. Now, sometimes you don't need the sketch because you can put that little parabola picture in your head and go from there, but definitely very helpful and a must in this one. If we didn't see you graphing, then we can't give you the points, even though the bulk of the points are going to come from, did you know that you had to factor to find those zeros first. So x minus 4 and x plus 1, which gives us 4 and negative 1. Don't care about how far down the graph is going. I care that you show me that that's an up-opening parabola because it has a positive x squared in the front. And then we want to know where is this less than 0, which would be from here to here for our negative 1 and our 4. And that would be the interval from negative 1 to 4 with parentheses, or open brackets, as we do that one. Then we're talking about a box. So the height of a box is 5 inches, okay? That's a giveaway there. The length is 3 inches more than the width. Uh-oh, I don't know what the width is. But they just told me that the length of this thing is going to be that plus 3. Oh, I don't want to use M. I'm going to use W for width. There we go. Find the width if the volume is 650 cubic inches. So volume, you have to remember, of a box, any rectangular prism, is length times width times height. Looks like so. And that would mean we would distribute again and subtract the 650 from both sides. And hopefully we would notice, hey, 5 comes out of all of those. I can factor out a greatest common monomial factor. And it is factorable with the very common 13 and 10 multiplying as factors for 130. So our two answers are negative 13 and 10, and then we remember, well, this is a word problem, so negative 13 is out. Our width is 10 inches. So again, using some really basic geometry formulas that everybody should know. Nothing that is way out there. It's basic boxes, rectangles, triangles. We should know about all of those basic formulas. Find the real numbers x and y that make this equation true. Well, we got parentheses all over the place, so let's get rid of those first. Negative 4 minus 8i in parentheses is just to show us that that's a complex number, so I don't need those parentheses. But in the back, some of you are still forgetting to distribute a negative. And I knew that because you wrote minus yi in the back. Now, how we're going to figure this out is by seeing both of these as a plus bi. So on the left-hand side, we would have 3 minus 8i. And on the right-hand side, we would have the minus 3 kind of sitting there in the way. So hang on a second. Let's add the 3. So we can see x plus yi. And then we can figure out, oh, this is the real number part. So x has to be 6. And this is the imaginary part. So y has to be negative 8. So that was just a matter of, do you know when complex numbers are equivalent to each other, when they're the same, when they're equal? And that means that the real number part and the imaginary part have to be in there together. All right, I made this on Friday. I didn't expect to have all those interruptions because it's Friday, but the intercom went off a couple of times, so there's breaks in there. They were testing some kind of system. So again, you had to have notes for all of this and add one more listen to the code word. So you have those down. You're going to go back and highlight the problems in your note packet that are similar to the test problems. Redo the review assignment. Honestly, redo it. Then have all of that done by October 19th or before. And then I'll check it off, make sure you have all of that, and then the deadline for the retake is October 20th. So don't come to me on the 20th and say, I've got all my stuff, can I retake? Not going to do that. People don't do well when they have that pressure. So this is the retake information for Chapter P, Part B.